The following video contains spoilers. Blue is the Warmest Color is a 2013 lesbian romantic drama film, co-written, co-produced and directed by Abdellatif Kechiche. The film is based on a 2010 cult graphic novel created by Jules Moreau of the same name. The film has been marred by controversy since its release, which I'll touch upon later. Also, if you haven't already seen this film, I have to warn you that it contains very graphic intimacy scenes. And before I dive into the film, I feel I need to explicitly state that since my first viewing in 2013, that I actually quite like this film. I'll expound on this later, but just because I choose to discuss critiques of something and appreciate there are very valid criticisms that actually hold a lot of weight, doesn't mean I can't simultaneously like or even love, at the very least, parts of something. That being said, I also think a lot of people, myself included, get very wrapped up in the likes and dislikes of others. What I'm trying to say is that my intention is not to make someone feel guilty for liking or disliking something, a piece of media no less. As such, you are very entitled to have your individual opinion and interpretation of this film. Once again, you can find the correct subtitles I've added in the settings. In the opening, we are first introduced to our main protagonist, 15-year-old high school student Adele, played by an actress of the same name, Adele Cheats. Before we go any further, I want to call attention to my appreciation of Cheats' portrayal of Adele. I love Seydoux, I've seen plenty of her films, but Adele to me is quite the highlight of this film, especially as she would have only been 18 during filming. There's a few things I want to note here. The first is that Adele, the character, is obviously very young. The timeline is hazy, but she's supposedly 15 when the film begins and 17, almost 18 before she starts seeing Emma, played by Seydoux, her 22-year-old love interest. This is part of where the controversy surrounding this film begins, as the age gap can be perceived as playing into the lesbian as predator trope, or as others have suggested, the predatory conversion trope, where a slight nudge from a lesbian encounter converts a seemingly straight girl. So not only are we talking about a predator in terms of age, but this idea of conversion where lesbian women are seen as, in a way, on the prowl for their prey. Aside from this problematic interpretation, Adele is at an age where she lacks a fixed self. I think this film says some very interesting things about identity, like how fragile it is. First, we see Adele's reflection approximately a minute into the film, fade from the bus window, perhaps visualizing this fragmented identity. It can comment on how young people may be impressionable to the many influences when it comes to the construction of identity. We see this as Adele's basically goaded into a brief relationship with Thomas, a boy at her school, by her so-called friends. This ties in neatly to the discussion of the very first and last scene of the film. I'll revisit this later, but again we see this unity, where the first frame, barring a few differences, is the same as the last. Where this story begins is where this story ends. Like how red and white are used extensively throughout Lady Snowblood, the colour blue is omnipresent in Blue is the Warmest Color. The film is built around the colours of Adele and Emma, with Adele, whose hair and eye colour are brown, sporting an outfit in this colour, and at the end we see her fully dressed in blue, the colours of Emma. Revisiting the first scene, I want to point out another recurring theme, which is the objectification of Adele. Not only does the camera trail behind her, we see Adele adjust her trousers. One of the first of many shots calling attention to her body, specifically her backside. We then see Adele walking towards her class as narration begins, with the narrator remaining anonymous. At this point we haven't heard Adele speak, so it's feasible to think that this voice belongs to her. It is shortly revealed that the voice actually belongs to a fellow classmate, and the passage she reads is from a novel called The Life of Marianne. This is notable for a few reasons. The first being that the French film title was originally The Life of Adele Chapters 1 and 2, clearly taking inspiration from the title of this text. This title change may have been done to better reflect the shift away from Moreau's comic, from love story to Bildungsroman. with the Bildungsroman genre being defined as loosely a coming-of-age journey. The change also better reflects the film's focus on Adele and the shaping of her identity, which when compared to the graphic novel, positioned Emma as more of a central character. Where, spoiler alert for the comic, we see Emma's own emotional journey as she reads Adele's diary following her death. The original title can further connote that Adele's story is incomplete, with future chapters yet to be written. I won't get too deep into discussing the life of Marianne, but in terms of how the passage relates to Adele, you could draw parallels to the discussion of class, values, and liberty. In the film, Adele also seeks an immediate connection like the one Marianne experienced, hoping to meet someone that can help her realize her lacking sense of self. This search for recognition by someone else. Following this, we see Adele with her friends as they evaluate boys, particularly Thomas, on their physical merits and obsess over the male gaze. This overt objectification of men may subvert the expectations of viewers, as we would typically expect this role positioning someone as nothing more than an object to be occupied by a woman. We then get a scene of Adele eating spaghetti bolognese with her parents. Food arguably plays an important role throughout the film. Firstly, it can evoke suggestive metaphors, like Adele's liking of fat on ham or learning to eat oysters from Emma. Adele also appears to lack table manners, talking whilst eating, chewing with her mouth open, licking her fingers and knife, asking for more food, and wiping her lips with her hand. This could emphasize Adele's class, a theme which permeates the film. This is fortified by a scene where Adele meets Emma's parents where they eat oysters, a relatively expensive and elegant food compared to tomatoes and pasta. And later when Adele cooks pasta for Emma's artsy and pretentious friends. The difference foreshadows that this relationship between Emma and Adele won't stand the test of time. Although Adele's parents are of the same class, but they chew discreetly. Thus, this voraciousness could highlight Adele's void, her lack of identity, filling it with food, or alternatively, her eating habits can reflect her love for mess, for food, for intercourse, and for intimacy. The camera then continues with its objectification of Adele, which will be an important theme later when we talk about Emma. Adele then leaves her house again, a scene reminiscent of the first and last. In this particular scene, Adele is no longer dressed in fully brown attire. This time she incorporates some elements of blue, her jeans and scarf. As viewers will predict, from the abnormal frequency of people dressed in blue, this is no ordinary walk, but the first electrifying encounter between Adele and the blue-coded Emma, a colour which is found in her eyes, clothes and hair. The pair pass each other on the street, locking eyes as the music swells. An intense encounter of curiosity and connection for the both of them. Afterwards, Adele goes on a date with Thomas, but later has an intimate dream about Emma. To seemingly quell these confusing newfound revelations about her sexuality, Adele decides to sleep with Thomas, only to confirm that she's missing something, which is not him. After consulting her friend, Adele breaks up with Thomas. He leaves, and this is one of the film's many shots of Adele alone. In this particular scene, the multi-layered meaning of this blue motif is depicted. Here it can signify Adele's lostness, particularly of identity, loneliness, alienation, and disconnection, which she appears to be even in crowds. The empty space of the blue bench emphasizes this void where other people could be, perhaps magnifying this alienation, loneliness, and disconnection with the world, and lack of real bonds she has in her life. Secondly, Adele is sat perpendicular to the bench, which can be interpreted as her defiance towards social norms, the peer pressure pushing her into a heteronormative relationship. Another critique of this film is its pacing, with Adele hopping into bed with Thomas scenes earlier before breaking up with him. According to Jonathan McAlmont, whilst Moreau's graphic novel does contain this particular chain of events, they make it clear that the events unravel over a 6-month period. allowing for better narrative structure with the passage of time. Moreau shows us how the pressure to be like everyone else can weigh you down over time and force you to act against your own nature. Kechiche shows us no passage of time, and so, according to McAlmont, Adele appears to move in and out of heterosexuality almost on a whim. Later, Adele is seen at a protest, important as this is a crucial focus on class in the film. Firstly, it's significant as it signals that Adele is working class. As Adele chants, these words can arguably reflect her inner feelings of being othered. Seeing herself as a reject, always on the outside, unable to find her place without the right face, and born without a silver spoon. Again, we get the appearance of the blue motif from the blue smoke, which can signify yet another meaning of blue, this time as a representation of this potential agency which Adele has in creating her own sense of self, or identity, free from outside influences through her activism. Another shot from Adele's class analyzes a passage from Antigone. The passage foreshadows the film's tragic ending, with the teacher stating that tragedy is unavoidable. It's what we cannot escape no matter what. There are a few ways the inclusion of Antigone may be interpreted. First of all, it appears that the version of this play used is Jean Anouilh's version. As the play was first performed during Nazi occupation, including this could represent a resistance to conforming. This maturation may be depicted in Adele's choice to shun the peer pressure to be in a heteronormative relationship, choosing Emma despite being mocked and by extension, prioritizing her own personal values. The teacher also stresses a connection between psychological maturity and tragedy, and suggests it is what makes us human. This could be a nod to Adele's fate at the end of the film, but also a nuanced acknowledgement of Moreau's comic, where, as I've stated, Adele dies at the end. Adele then shares a kiss with a friend named Beatrice that wears blue nail polish, but is rejected the next day. Beatrice tells Adele to forget about the kiss, which causes Adele to go out with a gay friend in an attempt to forget about being troubled over her sexual identity. After seeing her friend experience community at a gay bar, Adele leaves to wander into a lesbian bar. During this transition, the overwhelming blue lighting becomes bathed in warm colours such as red, yellow and orange. At the bar, Adele meets Emma, a fourth year of fine arts. During their meeting, Emma asks Adele about paintings. Adele tells her she knows Picasso. This interaction makes clear that Adele's identity isn't formed yet. Constantly looking to have her answers validated or giving vague answers like, I like it all, or I don't know much about it, but I like it. In the film, Adele references Pablo Picasso a few times, which is significant as this firstly illustrates their difference in art knowledge, something that's dear to Emma which Adele doesn't really care about, or at the very least, the way Emma wants her to. Picasso is also significant as he himself also famously had a blue period between 1900 and 1904. During this period, Picasso largely painted somber monochromatic paintings in shades of blue and blue-green. And as an artist, Emma has her own blue period. Moreover, Picasso's melancholic blue period mirrors the desolation of Adele as an outsider. The blue can also represent Adele's range of emotions, her sadness, curiosity, and passion as she discovers herself. Adele then tells Emma the name of her high school, and despite being much older and already having a girlfriend, Emma seeks Adele out at her school gate. This causes her friends to begin suspecting her of being a lesbian. Emma sketches Adele as she poses on a bench. Adele asks if she often draws people she meets. Emma tells her no, not often. This brings us back to the theme of objectification and also sets up the dynamic between Emma and Adele as artist and muse. The pair references Jean-Paul Sartre, where Emma explains the idea behind Sartre is that existence precedes essence. Essentially, what Sartre is trying to say is that there is no fixed identity or preordained path, as our existence comes first. If we relate it to the film, Emma is telling Adele that she has the freedom to create her own self and identity. which is arguably a particularly powerful message for the LGBTQ community who may feel enslaved to normative conditions. There's therefore something ironic about Emma handing Adele the finished sketch, to which Adele responds, "It's strange because it's me and it isn't." Emma, channeling Sartre's conception, tells Adele she's free to realize her own self, which is rather jarring next to the first of many representations of Adele from Emma, the vision of what she wants Adele to be. Whilst Emma begins their relationship by providing Adele with tools to aid her journey of self-discovery, teaching her art and philosophy, Adele ends up taking on an increasingly passive role in the relationship as she becomes objectified in Emma's paintings in the same way she's objectified by the camera's gaze. After being confronted, tormented, and ostracized by her friends over her relationship with Emma, in another class against the blue backdrop, the teacher discusses a literary text, this time a poem by Francis Ponge. The scene alludes to how ideological forces such as Catholic conservatism conditions us to be something we are not, which relates to this suppression of the natural identity of LGBTQ people. The text relates back to Sartre and how the condition of normative regulatory forces keep us bound. This is especially apt as it follows on from the horrific scene exposing the homophobia of her peers. Afterwards, Emma takes Adele on a date where she explores her identity through art at a museum. First, we see this visual where Adele's reflection is split, similar to the beginning with Adele on the bus. But instead of being complete, Adele's self appears to be split between her and Emma, suggesting her identity is taking shape with Emma's influence. Not only do we see Emma give Adele a sketch, a vision of who Emma wants Adele to be, but we also see Emma project this desire through their dates and dialogue. For instance, Emma tells Adele in a later scene, "Maybe you'll go to school and see that something else interests you," once again revealing her dissatisfaction with Adele's life choices, as Adele later desires to become a teacher, with Emma slowly exposing more of her elitism as the film progresses. As they gaze at nude female statues and paintings, we get a glimpse into the way in which Adele perceives female bodies. In conversations about identity, this viewing of art where we would insert our own individual meaning to interpret it, just as we are assigning meaning to this film, is echoed in Emma's creation of art. To elaborate, Adele, Emma's artistic inspiration, her muse, is quite literally transformed and moulded into a piece of art, for people to exert their own influence and meaning onto. But perhaps just as Emma is trying to force Adele into a vision of someone she's not, it could be contended that Adele tries to force Emma into remaining blue, as Adele's sole source of fulfillment. For Adele, her identity appears to unhealthily hinge on Emma being shaped around her life. Without an identity, Emma's the piece which completes her. After the couple bond over a picnic, they sleep together in a rather graphic and controversial scene, which I'll discuss later. Within the next few scenes, we see Adele attempt to eat oysters with Emma's bourgeois parents, who treat food as art, and Emma shares a relatively cheaper meal of pasta with Adele's parents. As discussed, these scenes emphasize the class difference between Emma and Adele, with Emma remarking that the pasta is simple. Something that I would have liked to see more of is how the couple navigates Adele's conservative parents, who believe Emma is Adele's tutor. I don't believe this friction of Emma being kept secret is ever explored or addressed again. Suddenly, we get a time skip where within the space of a few scenes, Adele is an adult, a teacher, and living with Emma. This relates back to McCalmont's criticism of pacing and the passage of time. He again compares the film to the comic, stressing that Moreau's original story spans over 15 years, including some very good times and some very bad times, that explain not only why Emma and Adele drift apart, but also why Emma would react to Adele's character's tortured infidelity with such a vicious outpouring of emotion. Emma and Adele host a party for Emma's artsy friends, where food once again is intrinsically linked to socializing. In this scene, we begin to realize a shift in the dynamic of Adele and Emma's relationship. Adele takes on a domestic role, cooking and serving Emma's cultured friends. Emma introduces Adele to a pregnant friend named Lise, and this party pretty much spells the doom for their relationship. Before discussing anything else, the blue in Emma's hair is gone. This coincides with Adele's recognition that Emma is falling for Lise, just as she once did for her. Initially, I sympathised more with Emma's pain, but over time realised that Emma, who's no stranger to emotional cheating, had probably already detached emotionally from Adele in her mind. This may be reflected in Emma's hair adopting a more natural hair colour as the intensity of their relationship waned. This notion is fortified by not only Emma's lack of care, but also her growing frustration with Adele. Any loving partner would probably help you set up or give you praise. Instead, Emma arrives with guests, ignores Adele in favour of Lise, alienates her in conversations about art, and subtly undermines Adele's teaching career by constantly pushing her to be a writer instead. A guest tells Adele, "What you do is really nice. On the paintings, your presence, your poses." Thus, Adele's not just less of an equal through serving in a domestic role, but in this transition from an active muse to a passive object for Emma's utility. Visualised especially well in a scene prior where Adele is cooking beside her representation on canvas. As Adele relishes in this role, Emma again appears frustrated by Adele's inability to comprehend a discussion about artists. It's very clear at this point that Emma longs for an intellectual and artistic equal, echoing later again that she wants more than just a cook for a partner. It feels as though Emma and her cultured friends view Adele as beneath them, constantly othering her by accentuating her working class background. Subsequently, Adele serving her cheap pasta to Emma's highbrow friends, which turns out to be somewhat of a hit, can be perceived as an act of defiance. Again, Emma's push of Adele to be what she wants her to be is ironic, considering her previous quoting of Sartre's dictum, which makes the point that we should determine our own identity. Adele also meets Samir, an aspiring actor at the party. As opposed to Emma, Samir is the one that notices Adele has been busy serving others that she hasn't eaten. The two get talking and later dance together as two films play in the background, Pandora Box and The Diary of a Lost Girl. These projections are again in blue. Just as Adele watches Lise and Emma get close, the character in the background, Lulu, reflects Adele's jealousy. Moreover, both heroines are controlled by ideologies just as Adele is. After denying her intimacy, Emma leaves a message for Adele, explaining that she'll be home late and spend the evening working with Lise. This loneliness and inferiority pushes Adele into the arms and attention of a male colleague. When Adele arrives home, she is caught off guard. Emma knows about her cheating and flies into a rage, breaking up with her. For someone that appears to have already checked out of the relationship, Emma seems uncharacteristically and hypocritically angry, considering she was also in a relationship when she first took an interest in the 17-year-old Adele. Emma's own split self is also visible in her reflection. This could be interpreted as her being torn between Lise and Adele. Alternatively, if she's already emotionally detached from the relationship, this could reflect her guilt of already having left Adele or knowing that she was just waiting for Adele to do something to justify her exit. So this bubbling of emotion unleashed on Adele could be directed just as much at herself as it is Adele. Post-breakup, Adele is initially dressed and coded in bright blue, perhaps in denial, spending most of her time in the classroom. But as she grapples with the reality of her heartbreak, Adele begins wearing darker colours like black, signalling that she's in mourning. Adele's depression is also accentuated by the cheerful and innocent children. By spending a lot of her time in a classroom, it suggests that Adele is finally forced to define herself through something other than her romantic relationship. And the constant focus of Adele around children could also insinuate that this loss of Emma is akin to a loss of innocence, as Emma was her first significant love. Without Emma, Adele reverts to this childlike state and blank slate where she needs to learn how to define herself without Emma. We get a sequence of scenes illustrating Adele's depression, including one where Adele goes on a school trip to the beach. Adele bathes in water, purifying herself before entering a new life stage or chapter. It's the first time since Adele's process of emotional release, of catharsis, that we see Adele somewhat at peace. Adele asks Emma to meet with her at a restaurant. We know it's 3 years later as Lise's daughter is 3 years old. Whilst she's happy at her job, Adele hasn't fully accepted the breakup, still holding a torch for Emma. Whilst she's fulfilled by her role as a teacher, the door is slightly ajar for Adele. She's still willing to be Emma's object if she wants her to. They kiss, but Emma withdraws, explaining she's no longer in love with her. This rejection gives Adele the closure she needs, reaffirming that she must completely commit to determining her own sense of self and identity. The film places emphasis on what Adele gleans from her teachers, with her being influenced by texts such as The Life of Marianne or Antigone. In this final classroom scene, Adele is impersonating her own teachers when she guides her students through a poem. Donning a blue dress, Adele attends Emma's art exhibition, shared with another artist. A man approaches Emma to ask her questions about her art. He explains, "I can see old Emma, new Emma, red and blue." This speaks to the 2 life stages and creative periods of Emma, her blue period with Adele and her red with Lise. It's interesting to me that this red period is reminiscent of Picasso's rose period, which also began right after his blue period in 1904. These periods may be a representation of Emma's state of mind during the 2 different relationships. The blue may signify the freedom, immaturity, and excitement she had with Adele. Blue is fun and exciting, but it's not deep enough or as fulfilling as the maturity and passion of red with Lise, the colour of love. For Picasso, 1904 was the year he met a muse and mistress, which led to a period of increased joy and romance, just as Lise did for Emma. The guest speaking to Emma continues. She seems totally at peace, yet there's something troubling in her eyes. These words can be indirectly speaking about Emma, especially as the only blue that remains is in Emma's eyes. As Emma expressed at the restaurant, while she's no longer in love with Adele, she'll always have infinite tenderness for her. During the restaurant scene, Emma does admit that the physical intimacy with Lise is not like with Adele, but she cannot go back to this blue period. Emma has matured, acknowledging there is something physically missing with Lise, visualized in her lingering blue eyes for Adele. But while she acknowledges this, the deeper emotional contentment she has with Lise means Emma is willing to sacrifice and forego the complete satisfaction of physical intimacy. Emma is experiencing incipient happiness, as the guest puts it, after suffering the anguish from her relationship with Adele. At Emma's exhibition, we see art depicting Adele again. Throughout the film, the shifting location of her art affects its meaning. In the first instance, we see the sketch drawn by art student Emma. The sketch is shown through a private gaze shared between Emma and Adele. The first sketch is for Emma alone and remains unduplicated. As their relationship progresses, Emma's paintings of Adele are displayed at their shared apartment, although this exhibition still remains within their private space. But as the relationship deteriorates, Adele becomes increasingly objectified by the size and amount of Emma's paintings. In the finale, the paintings completely lose their uniqueness and privacy, being displayed publicly in a prestigious art gallery for the pleasure of others. As such, we see the audience and locations change parallel to the relationship. Lise, now in a relationship with Emma, greets Adele. She tells her, "And you see, you're still here," gesturing to Emma's painting. One way to look at it is that the aspect of Adele that can provide Emma with more fulfilling carnal intimacy will continue to haunt Emma. On the other hand, it could connote that by illustrating Adele on canvas, Emma has frozen her in time, the past, particularly as this opening doubles as the end of Emma's student career and the finality of her relationship with Adele. When looking at the actual content of the painting, we see three women, all of which are Adele. When living with Emma, Adele's life or identity was arguably split into three: her private life with Emma, her life at school, and her identity when socializing around Emma's friends. We finally see Adele face her fragmented identity head on, a kind of mirror image to Adele, a motif we see repeated in the film. And in this painting reflected back at her, it appears that Adele's spirit is finally free. After Adele looks around, she is juxtaposed with pregnant red paintings of Lise in the background, a contrast of the two life bearers of Emma's life. As the couple radiates happiness, Adele realizes that Emma has genuinely moved on with Lise, with Adele in the painting quite literally behind them. And notice, wearing a deep red shirt, the colour Emma has chosen. Finally, I want to bring things back to the colour blue. As established, the colour has many meanings, which appears to change throughout the film. In the beginning, bold blue contrasted the dull, lifeless browns of both Adele and the people around her. Blue was excitement. Later, blue becomes a symbol for Emma, fulfillment of Adele's void, as Emma is her comfort, her home. Despite being a cool or cold colour, the pull of blue is so strong that Adele finds warmth in it. The film also teaches and conditions us to associate blue with warmth, as where there is love, there is blue. At the end of the film, Adele has a brief conversation with Samir. Realizing she doesn't belong in Emma's world anymore, she leaves. Samir chases after her but appears to mistakenly go in the opposite direction. Adele, in her vibrant blue dress, walks away with the blue that belonged to Emma. One interpretation of the ending is that Adele, looking put together and no longer an emotional wreck, no longer depends on Emma in the construction of her identity, reclaiming the colour blue for herself. This may be supported by the idea that Adele's blue dress is finally reflecting Emma's representation of her, which in this case the Adele in Emma's canvas is free from her. Moreover, when we first saw Emma, she quoted Sartre as disgust. Blue for Emma was Emma's ability to create her own vision of herself, so Adele, now coded as somewhat blue, can symbolize she now has what Emma once had, the ability to create her own identity. Adele walking away strengthens this argument that she is finally ready to put Emma behind her. This is probably the biggest change I preferred over the graphic novel, Adele more jaded but older, wiser and moving on, as opposed to dying because she's unable to live without Emma. Another interpretation is that because of the film's cyclical themes, with the first and last scene being similar, that Adele wearing blue replaces Emma's role in becoming Samir's object of desire. Aside from the lesbian as predator or predatory conversion trope, the film has garnered significant controversy for its infamous graphic scenes, where Emma and Adele sleep together, and the director's alleged mistreatment and exploitation of the actresses. Keep in mind, these are the two main criticisms of the film. I'll start off with why people may like this film, or at least aspects of it. For many, they like this film in spite of its flaws, not because of them. Also, what people may perceive to be flaws can be subjective sometimes. Whilst the overly graphic scenes didn't bother me before, I didn't particularly care for them either. That being said, there are people that don't consider the graphic scenes flaws and think they actually add to the film. According to Vulture, approximately 800 hours of footage was shot, which was then cut down, lending the film a certain documentary rawness to capturing the intensity of Adele's first love. Intimate close-up shots studying the characters' faces helped viewers to empathize and experience Adele's life through her eyes, including the extreme pain caused by the breakdown of her relationship, and the destabilization of her identity that follows. By focusing on the mundanity of everyday life, I feel as though the film successfully established for some people an attachment to Adele's character, which helps certain viewers feel her range of emotions. especially as much of the film could be described as feeling familiar. The close-up shots can further add to this emotional connection, heightening the intensity of their reactions, especially during their breakup scene. As Anthony Lane wrote in his review for The New Yorker, "So much of this film is absorbed in the close-up shots that now I understand what it means to be in the full flush of youth." I think a large part of the attraction and draw to this film was that many spectators saw themselves in Adele. To some, the film is powerfully human, gut-wrenching, provoking a subjective and individualized emotional response, especially if they see parallels to their own failed relationships. For others, the same thing can be perceived as a flaw, with the film feeling uncomfortably intrusive. So the first aspect of the film that garnered significant controversy was the duration of the intimacy scenes and the style in which they were shot, which overshadowed other aspects of the film. Although many later countered these criticisms of voyeurism with foreigners, especially Americans, just not understanding European art house cinema, or simply a difference in culture. This position has gathered steam as people began pointing to the fact that Sundance Selects announced the film would be released in the US with an NC-17 rating. For context, the film was rated a 12 in France. In relation to the male gaze coined by Laura Mulvey in a 1975 essay, it has been suggested that the film was directed to satisfy this masculine gaze, their pleasure in looking. A counter to this is that if we choose to credit Kechiche with a strategic inclusion of this theme to spotlight Emma's objectification of Adele. However, a common complaint wasn't just that the film sought to satisfy hetero male viewers, but by doing so could subconsciously promote this idea that the sexuality of queer women is performed for male viewing. Hence, the calls for more authentic portrayals of these relationships, and in this particular case, the intimacy scenes. On their blog, Moreau, the graphic novelist, expressed their dissatisfaction for, firstly, the lack of real lesbians on set, and secondly, the picturesque and unrealistically beautiful intimacy scenes between Emma and Adele. They stated, especially when everyone was giggling, the heteronormative laughed because they don't understand it, the gay and queer people laughed because it's not convincing. And among the only people we didn't hear giggling were the potential guys too busy feasting their eyes on an incarnation of their fantasies on screen. In response to being slammed by criticism of lacking authentic portrayals, Kechiche explained, "What I was trying to do was to film what I found beautiful, so we shot them like paintings, like sculptures." But what plagued the film wasn't just talk of voyeurism, but exploitative dynamics on set. Vulture gave a brief timeline detailing what happened behind the scenes. The drama began on September 1st, 2013, when the film's two lead actresses spoke out about the demanding filming conditions. Comments directed especially towards the filming of the intimacy scenes, which Seydoux said took 10 days. Exarchopoulos added, "Most people don't even dare to ask the things that he did, and they're more respectful. You get reassured during those scenes, and they're choreographed, which desexualizes the act." Both actresses seemingly agreed that they never wanted to work with Kechiche again. This basically led to a back-and-forth brawl between Kechiche and Seydoux in particular, which culminated in him proclaiming that the film had been soiled too much, and calling Seydoux an arrogant, spoiled child. He went on to allege that Miss Seydoux, who after having repeatedly thanked me publicly and privately and having wept in my arms at Cannes for allowing her to take on this noble role, has, against all the odds and all personal coherence, radically changed her attitude towards me. And earlier, if Seydoux lived such a bad experience, why did she come to Cannes, try on robes and jewellery all day? B. Ruby Rich, writing for Criterion, had this to offer about the treatment of the two leading ladies. Rough treatment is, again, so prevalent as to come up in nearly every interview I've conducted with an actress or director, but always off the record. Rich also asks this: Would these charges have been leveled if the subject matter weren't a lesbian relationship? Their belief is this: when the material is too tough, people look around for an alibi, something more socially acceptable on which to blame their discomfort. I must have misremembered because I thought the issues between Seydoux and Kechiche had been resolved. But in 2023, Seydoux told Marie Claire once again, "People said to me, you should shut up." Kechiche was manipulative. He shifted the problem so that if I spoke, people would say it's because I'm a bourgeois. But the point was, we had been psychologically harassed on set. Seydoux had also been asked about the inclusion of an intimacy coordinator on set by The Hollywood Reporter, to which her response was, no, it was the whole film. The way we shot this film was insane. The guy is just nuts. An example of what Seydoux was referring to is a scene where she was provoked and forced for an excessive amount of time to continually slap and hit Adele on set to give a more realistic performance. This brings us to the question of whether artists should suffer for their art. Finally, do you think the luster of Blue is the Warmest Color will wane, or will its discussion of identity and particularly of class guarantee the film's importance and timelessness long after the flames of the current disputes have settled into ash? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.